We are here this afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. There's an awful lot of people here, and so really appreciate it. We're here to talk about weaponizing algorithms. Now, that could mean lots of different things, but before we get started, it might be better if maybe, Daniel, you give everybody a little bit of background on yourself and why you're particularly interested in this topic, and then we'll bounce it back to me, and I'll do the same thing.
Absolutely, with great pleasure. I've been an industry analyst, very similar to you actually, for over a decade, mainly focusing on advertising and data-driven industries. At the same time, have an kind of academic interest. I'm a sociologist and economist, and I've worked in space, how does artificial intelligence shape society and economy? And I've always felt a bit schizophrenic about this, because at daytime I was advising the ad industry on how to optimize targeting systems, and at night I was criticizing my day's work. Yeah. And it's this kind of symbiosis, these two split souls that are in me, and which I'm very, very interested in the topic of weaponizing algorithms, using them for ways in which they weren't intended. And I think we are at a particular stage now in history where this is something mainstream that is often understood when we think about Facebook and other things, but there are much broader undercurrents which I think we should disentangle today, and I very much look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, very much so. And we're not going to do this in a traditional sort of interviewer-interviewee sense. You know, we basically agreed that we're just going to have a conversation, and hopefully we'll give you lots of really interesting takeaways and thoughts for discussion, both now and later, and also online. In fact, somebody paid me to say, don't forget hashtag DN18, just to make sure you're using that. But you know, I've been a journalist for many, many years. I'm also an analyst. I helped set up VB Insight, which is VentureBeat's research arm. VentureBeat, for those who don't know, is one of the big tech news publications. We try and basically report the news every single day and make sense of what technology is doing to our lives. My particular speciality for a while was marketing technology. And that came from the fact that prior to VentureBeat, I ran a number of successful software companies and was implementing those marketing technologies in order to sell our products and services. And so, of course, I've seen the rise of algorithms ever since, you know, the very first social networks, and it's been really super interesting to me to see where we are today. I mean, maybe that's where we start. I mean, where are we today, and what is the state of, you know, algorithms in our society? I mean, we talk about weaponizing algorithms. There's some obvious connotations there in terms of actual weapons, but I feel there are many, many more subtle ways that we can talk about weaponizing algorithms.
Indeed, we really have to understand how do algorithms influence our everyday lives, our economy and our society. And often when people think about computers or interactive technologies, that they mediate between people, that they send information back and forth and connect people. But there's something much broader, because algorithms are performative. They don't just neutrally mediate, at the same time they shape realities. No? They think of your Spotify playlist that sends you songs you like, and that reinforces what you like, and so forth. So there's a lot of self-fulfilling prophecy in what algorithms do. They don't just mediate, they shape the world around us. And there are many instances where it's apparent to us as consumers, in social media and so forth, but also many ways where it isn't apparent. Credit card scoring, travel, building planning permissions, it goes through the entire economy today. So we are actually living in, or starting to live in, an algorithmic world where our society has a political OS, if you will, but it also starts to have an algorithmic OS. Right. And the thing is, we can, as consumers and citizens, we can protest against our politicians. We understand cognitively what they're doing. But the algorithmic world, this infrastructure layer of our society, it's beyond human cognition for most. So there are no anchor points, no angles where you can intervene in this world. And this is politically, and from a perspective of social participation, incredibly scary and problematic. And there are actors now who are using knowledge advantages in this world to shape and engineer society in new ways.
Yeah, and in varying levels of extremity as well. So, you know, we've all, I'm sure, been reading the news and have been reading the news for the last couple of years in terms of what was happening around the US elections, what was happening around the Brexit vote potentially. You you know, algorithms there took advantage of the fact that if people are massively left-swinging or people are massively right-swinging in their political views, you can't really change their mind. But if you take the center line and take the people that are just left of center and identify them using demographics, psychographics, you can feed them information that pushes them ever so slightly across to the other side and consequently affect their vote and ultimately, I guess, affect democracy. I mean, that's one example. I think it's really interesting you brought up that we're living in an algorithmic world, because I'm not sure people understand how far we've gone with that so far. You know, you might think that the episode of Black Mirror where that woman's social score was going down all the time because she was interacting with the wrong person is just fiction, but it's not fiction, because in China right now, they are using CCTV cameras and artificial intelligence with computer vision to identify your face, and they identify the face of the people that you are mingling with on the streets, and if they find a pattern where you're always with the same person, they assume friendship, and if that person's social status is lower than yours, then your credit rating and access to buildings is also diminished.
And that's the important thing to say. It's, there are real-life consequences to this behavior. University education, whether you're allowed to travel or not. So in that sense, Black Mirror is just a cheap version of China in that sense. Yeah? It's much more extreme, saying the reality is more profound than fiction could ever imagine. I'm not saying that we are entering this world today pervasively in all societies, but it shows what's possible. One thing I would say, though, you mentioned the Facebook and political election example, and basically engineering people, something that advertising and PR in other ways have always done. And I think we forget that what we're seeing now are new methods and tools, but the logic behind it has been the same throughout centuries. There's always, I have this geeky obsession with the history of statistics. And data and power were always intertwined. The first statistics, you know, the normal distribution, one of the typical statistical principles, it was always literally about what are normal people and what are deviant people. The first statistics in the world were who is healthy and who is sick, who deviates from the norm, who doesn't. It was all means to control people. And these political ambitions, controlling people, shaped actually how statistics evolved. And what we see in this algorithmic world today with election meddling, it's in a sense nothing else. It's making up, it's engineering people, but there's a qualitative difference, I think, which is it's happening at a massive scale, and the principles and mechanisms are not, people can't interrogate, protest against, lay bare, because it's often done in a very, very subtle and black box way. But the overarching motivations behind it are the same. So there's novelty and there's continuity at the same time.
And we have an inherent problem with that, because most algorithms, whether you think they are not actually very sophisticated. So they're operating on the middle of the bell curve. So we're looking for the average person. They're doing some segmentation within that, but most of them aren't really that good.
Yeah.
The problem is if they actually affect human behavior, if they affect culture, if they force us down a particular path, what actually happens is we lower and lower and lower that bell curve so that there are more people in the middle. And that starts to re-engineer culture so that we're more and more and more alike with each other, which I personally find ridiculously scary. I mean, I don't want to be alike. I don't want to be like anybody else. But if we have algorithms that are actually forcing us to flatten the bell curve, we're going to end up being much, much more like each other.
I got reminded, by your example, of the book The Master Algorithms by Pedro Domingos. I don't know who of you has read it. And there's a fascinating quote in there that perfectly complements your example. He says, people worry that computers will get too smart and take over the world, but the real problem is they're too dumb and they have already taken over the world. And that's exactly the thing. Algorithms aren't that smart, but they can be manipulated. Yeah? And
absolutely.
That's, I think, that is the profound issue. We're not dealing with infallible systems. We're dealing with highly fallible systems that are engineered often with particular purposes, lay psychological, lay sociological assumptions by programmers. Think of dating platforms, opposites attract or equals attract and so forth. And the whole thing can be exploited. You mentioned Facebook. and political meddling. I mean, we both have worked in the world of marketing and programmatic advertising. And I think there is one thing is the systems that we rely on today, they're actually prone to this manipulation because of their economic incentives.
Yes.
There's always an optimization logic. And that, I think, I hope you agree, is maximize platform time. And everything that maximizes platform time is good in the logic of the platform. And fake news, harsh statements, all these things maximize platform times. So not only do purveyors of fake news exploit algorithmic loopholes, they also exploit the economic logic that underpin many of the algorithmic systems that we rely on today.
Yeah, because Facebook's job is to make money, right? So if you look at the way, for example, that Facebook attributes sale to Facebook, if you advertise through Facebook, actually show of hands, who advertises through Facebook to their... So we have very few people, much lower than I expected. So if you are advertising through Facebook to your target audience, what is actually happening is as soon as Facebook records one single impression on somebody's screen, they then attribute any sale in the next 6 months to them, regardless of whether they were the final point of sale or not. And that's incredibly difficult from a marketer's standpoint, because if you're a marketer and you're effectively using first-click attribution, which is what Facebook are forcing down your throat, you really don't know which of your advertisements, which of your channels, which of your campaigns actually did the job and got somebody to give you their credit card. But Facebook will claim it, which means you'll look at your Facebook advertising and it will look as if you're making a profit on that advertising. You're really not, because they didn't force the sale. They just forced maybe the initial view, and most people ignore initial views anyway. You know, we've noticed that advertising just doesn't work anymore. So, you know, when we think about that, that's purely driven by what you were saying, which is, you know, it's economic reasons why, but Facebook just wants to make a profit. They want to make as much profit as possible. It's why Instagram went from chronological order photographs to an algorithmic order, because if they can do that and they can control what you see and who you see and which friends you see, then insert the right advertisements in the right place, they can make a profit.
And I think with this example, it also becomes clear why we are today talking about the weaponization of algorithms and not algorithms as weapons. No, weaponization for me is something completely different from a weapon. Weaponization is using something that exists for some different purpose and appropriating that purpose and turning it into a weapon. And a weapon, in that sense, is not something that kills people, but something that, through brute force or something else, furthers your own biased aims. And of course, we had the Facebook example, but now, back to history. I think if we do an archaeology of weaponized algorithms, we come back to the financial markets, where it first started, with so-called in high-frequency trading, with predatory algorithms that seek inefficiencies in the markets, that seek liquidity problems, and rather than just exploiting them, actually push markets in a certain direction, push them up or push them down. And we've seen it, as I said, in Facebook, election meddling, but I think there are much broader issues but also affects us, the weaponization of algorithms. We spoke about, for instance, the next generation of fake news, where new video engineering systems fake an actor.
Yep.
And there are so many examples. I don't know what you are seeing from your experience as at VentureBeat, where beyond Facebook such weaponization takes place.
Yeah, I mean, the deepfake community is actually growing at a vast rate of knots. And in the world of computer graphics, we've always had this problem when we're representing human beings of the uncanny valley effect, where it doesn't quite look human. It's so close, but there's just something wrong, and it makes you feel a little bit uneasy. And what they're doing instead is they're taking existing video of people. The famous example that everyone's probably seen was a fake speech by Barack Obama. But because they're using actual video, it looks actually like that person is saying what they're programming it to say. Adobe has a product that allows you to analyze audio, and then from that audio, you can make anyone say anything. You can actually write out entire sentences. It will entirely synthesize it. It will sound just like you. So you combine that with deepfake video technology, and all of a sudden we have this new generation of videos that we can share around as propaganda to change people's minds. Apply an algorithm to that and target the right people. You have an extremely potent weapon.
At leading universities in this space, there are departments or research groups for computational propaganda that exactly look at this. So there's a big social relevance to this. And I think another thing, of course, is more and more algorithms are, of course, embedded in more or less complex machine learning systems. And these systems, we know, are often probability-driven and not perfect. And we have seen recently the rise of adversarial attacks, so attacks on how machine learning systems construct knowledge. If they work through reinforcement learning, for instance, you sneak in, let's say, other learning objects which skew or change what the system thinks is right.
Right.
And that happens in an often extremely, or that can happen, it's just research studies now, but it can happen in an incredibly subtle way because the data is so vast that there's no human oversight of this. And we've seen examples in adversarial attacks, for instance, where when you change, maybe you've seen it, a picture of a panda bear. Then there was just a pixel changed, unrecognizable to the human eye, and then the image recognition AI thought, well, this is not a panda bear, this is a gibbon.
Yes.
And imagine you can do the same thing with self-driving cars. It works even if you just print something out, make a fake stop sign. So you could manipulate traffic that way. So I think these are completely new ways of weaponizing algorithms. We don't just exploit existing systems, but where you completely change how systems interact with the world and how they learn.
So we've probably scared the bejesus out of everybody in the room. Just for a final comment, where do you think we're going with the future, and is there a way back for us to maybe insert some more humanity into our algorithmic future?
Yes, we're in a dark room here. It's November, and I'm German, so these are the perfect ingredients for being dystopian. But weapons work both ways, right? We spoke about China.
Yes.
But what about Chinese citizens that could weaponize something? Let's say pixelate their face, or be prevented from being recognized by an image recognition algorithm. So I think we also have to see it as an interplay, again, of oppression control and resistance. So this weaponization doesn't go one way. But it's now actually, maybe they're broadly also tools of expression that can be used. But people have to get smarter about this. It's a question of education. It's a question of popular culture. I think the last thing is there are many discussions now on a regulatory perspective and others how to, let's say, influence optimization logics on Facebook and others, and whether AI, like XAI, should be humanly explainable or not. There are lots of pros and cons, but I don't know how you're seeing it, that the thinking in this space has advanced a lot, in particular in the last year or so.
Yeah, I think so too. And that is a perfect footnote for the end of our conversation. This has been an absolute joy. Thank you very much from me, Stewart Rogers, and Daniel Knapp.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great to speak to you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.